There are moments in fashion that don't just create trends, they create history. In October 2017, at Howard University's homecoming, a single candid photograph changed the fate of a 20-year-old girl forever. In that frame, amidst a sea of students, there was one face the camera simply could not ignore: Anok Yai. The most remarkable part? When the photo went viral overnight, Anok thought it was nothing more than a joke. At the time, she was a biochemistry student planning to become a doctor or a researcher. No one, not even herself, could have imagined that just a few months later she would walk the runway in Milan, opening the show for Prada. And that moment did not just transform her life, it shook an industry that had been resting far too long in its comfort zone. What made Anok a phenomenon wasn't simply the story of going from unknown to supermodel. Fashion has seen its share of lucky discoveries. What was different here was timing. Anok arrived at the exact moment the world was craving a new kind of symbol, a face that was not only beautiful, but meaningful. On the runway, Anok is cold, commanding, with eyes so sharp they silence an entire room. Yet, off the runway, she was just a young student, the daughter of South Sudanese refugees, growing up in New Hampshire, one of the least diverse states in America. It's this contrast that makes her magnetic, a face with otherworldly presence, born from a life that is painfully real. Gen Z needs a figure like Anok Yai, and the reason is simple. This generation no longer believes in the flawless ideals built by old media. They don't just want to see beauty, they want to see themselves in it, the differences, the struggles, the cracks. And through her own journey, Anok has become a mirror for millions of young people around the world. When she opened Prada's Fall/Winter 2018 show, becoming only the second black model in history to do so after Naomi Campbell in 1997, it wasn't just a catwalk, it was a statement. Fashion, no matter how slow, must change. A new era was beginning, and Anok Yai was its face. But to become a global icon, Anok had to carry more than just a viral photo. Her path has been one of challenges, where the spotlight of the runway always comes with the shadow of prejudice. And that is the story we are about to explore, the journey from an anonymous face in the crowd to the Gen Z icon redefining modern fashion. To understand why Anok Yai has become one of the defining icons of a new generation in fashion, you have to start at the roots, her childhood. Anok was born in 1997 into a South Sudanese family. Her early years were marked by journeys of migration as her family left behind a homeland torn by conflict in search of safety. They eventually settled in Manchester, New Hampshire, a quiet, small town, but also one of the whitest communities in America. For Anok, that meant growing up with a constant sense of not belonging. In her classrooms, she was often one of the very few black students. On the playground, curious stares and at times prejudice made her feel isolated, as though her very presence was somehow out of place. She would later recall moments when she felt invisible, as if her existence was never fully acknowledged. But within that loneliness, Anok learned to stand firm. Her family reminded her, time and again, never to forget her roots. She grew up with stories of South Sudan, of the strength of African women, of a beauty that did not need anyone's permission to be recognized. Those lessons planted a belief deep inside her. Difference is not a burden, it is a mark of identity. Still, her teenage years were far from easy. Anok wrestled with confidence, wondering if her sharp features, her dark skin, her deep-set eyes, her tall, slender frame could ever be seen as beautiful in a society that worshipped Eurocentric ideals of blonde hair and pale skin. In the glossy world of billboards and ads, she could not find herself, and that absence quietly convinced her that her path should be a different one, stable, normal, far from the spotlight. She chose to study biochemistry at Plymouth State University, dreaming of becoming a doctor or a researcher. Fashion was never in the picture. The thought of seeing her face on the cover of Vogue was unthinkable. And yet, those very years of being different built her foundation. When destiny came calling, in the form of that viral photograph at Howard, Anouk was no longer a fragile girl. She had been forged by the challenges of her upbringing, by the isolation of a small town, and by the burning desire to prove, I have the right to exist. I have the right to be seen. Gen Z has grown up in a world different from generations before. This is a generation that has witnessed the collapse of artificial ideals, where authenticity matters more than appearances. And Anouk, through the truth of her journey, embodies that belief. She is not a sweet fairy tale. She is proof of the strength that comes from being real. That's why, when she entered fashion, Anouk did not just bring a striking face, she brought a story, one that, once heard, felt undeniably different, powerful, and impossible to forget. Destiny often knocks at the most ordinary moments. For Anok Yai, it was homecoming day at Howard University in 2017. She didn't arrive as a star, but as a freshman student, wearing a simple black crop top and fitted jeans, walking casually among her friends. Yet, when a street-style photographer spotted her and snapped a few photos, everything changed. That image, once posted on Instagram, spread like wildfire. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Within days, the media called her the mysterious girl at Howard. Strangers who had never heard her name began searching for her, talking about her, and soon the impossible happened. Anouk was crowned the most beautiful woman ever photographed at a college festival. From an ordinary student, Anouk suddenly became an internet sensation. But more importantly, people within the fashion industry took notice. IMG Models, one of the world's leading agencies, reached out almost immediately. And just months later, Anouk signed a contract, stepping onto a path she had never even considered: professional modeling. What made Anouk extraordinary was not just the viral photo. She brought something fashion had long been waiting for, but rarely found: freshness, difference, and a beauty that couldn't be blended into sameness. In a world overflowing with faces that looked alike, Anouk stood out like a sharp cut, striking, unforgettable. After just a few shows, she was impossible to ignore. In 2018, at Milan Fashion Week, Anouk became the first Black model to open Prada since Naomi Campbell in 1997. This was not just a career milestone, it was history. 2 decades after Naomi, Anouk followed in her footsteps, proving that the world was ready, or rather forced to be ready, for a beauty that no longer fit old standards. That moment changed everything. The media hailed her as the face of a new generation. Major brands lined up to have her on their runways: Balmain, Givenchy, Chanel, Tom Ford. Every step she took left audiences breathless, not because of the dazzling clothes, but because Anouk's very presence could transform the runway into her stage. What makes Anouk unique is not only her appearance. She is not the kind of model defined simply by a beautiful face or a perfect body. She brings an energy that feels both otherworldly and familiar. Her deep-set eyes, angular features, and commanding walk create an aura of mystery. Yet at the same time, on social media, Anouk shares glimpses of her real life, laughing with friends, offering her thoughts on fashion, speaking openly about her journey. She is both high fashion's ethereal muse and a relatable Gen Z woman, not distant, not hidden behind a flawless facade. By 2021-2022, her momentum reached its peak. Anouk graced the covers of Vogue, ID, and Dazed,
Critics called her one of the defining faces of fashion's new decade. With every photo shoot, she proved that she wasn't just a lucky viral sensation, she was building a legacy, reshaping the very definition of beauty. And what did Gen Z see in her? They saw a story that mirrored their own, a generation that no longer believes in airbrushed perfection, but longs for figures who emerge from doubt, from shadows, and still choose to be unapologetically themselves. That is why Anok has become more than a successful model. She has become a symbol for a generation that values truth over glamour. If Naomi Campbell was the Black Panther of the 1990s, then Anok Yai is the flame of Gen Z, not just for her beauty, but for the spirit of living authentically in the truest sense of the word.
The lights of the runway may glitter, but behind them lie shadows few dare to name. For Anok Yai, the path to the top was never smooth or effortless. From the very beginning of her career, she carried a heavy label, a Black model, an African woman. In an industry still dominated by Eurocentric standards, white skin, straight hair, narrow noses, Anok's presence, with her luminous dark skin, natural curls, and piercing gaze, meant she had to endure wave after wave of prejudice. Some in the industry bluntly remarked, "She's only famous because she looks different." Those words didn't just dismiss her talent, they denied the resilience and discipline that brought her there. The higher she rose, the heavier the burden became. After becoming the first Black model to open Prada since Naomi Campbell, Anok was suddenly cast as a pioneer. She no longer represented just herself, but an entire community, an entire generation of models of color striving to break through. That responsibility, at times, felt even heavier than the stilettos she had to wear on the catwalk. There were moments when Anok admitted she felt isolated within the very industry where she shined the brightest. Backstage, where other models blended in easily, she was sometimes overlooked, or worse, whispered about. At times, she felt more like a diversity project than a true talent being recognized. The murmurs, the sidelong glances, the half-joking remarks, all of it became an invisible pressure pressing down on her. But race wasn't the only challenge. Anok also faced another rigid stereotype, the image of the cold, untouchable supermodel that fashion demanded. In truth, she is a Gen Z woman who values authenticity, who wants to share her emotions and her voice. Yet the industry often pressured her to stay silent, to embody only the message, "Be beautiful, but don't speak." It was a conflict between the real Anok and the role the runway forced her to play. The weight of this contradiction sometimes pushed her into mental health struggles. Anok has admitted that the flashing lights could be overwhelming, that the suffocating attention made it hard to breathe. More than once, she had to step back from the spotlight, to heal, to find balance again between Anok the supermodel and Anok the human being. And yet, what makes her remarkable is the way she faced it all. Where older generations of models chose to hide their pain in order to maintain a flawless image, Anok chose transparency. She did not shy away from sharing her struggles, her negative emotions, even her most vulnerable moments. And paradoxically, that honesty made audiences love her even more, because in a world drowning in artificial perfection, raw vulnerability becomes a source of power. Gen Z sees themselves in Anok. They see a young woman who is not perfect, but courageous, not cold and unreachable, but so real that she sometimes touches their own pain. And that is why Anok has become a symbol, not because she never fell, but because she fell and still stood back up, stronger than before. Fashion once worshipped perfection, but for Anok Yai, it is the scars in her soul that make her extraordinary. She has turned prejudice into fuel. She has turned doubt into opportunities to prove herself. And above all, she has shown that the true power of a supermodel lies not in flawless images, but in the ability to exist and to shine despite every skeptical gaze. There are moments in fashion that don't just live on the runway. They become culture. They become history. For Anok Yai, that moment came when she stepped onto Prada's runway in 2018, opening the show with her sharp gaze, radiant eyes, and unmistakable presence. In that instant, the entire fashion world seemed to pause. After more than 2 decades, a black model was once again given the honor of opening Prada, and that name was Anok Yai. It wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a historic milestone. Before Anok, the last to hold that place was Naomi Campbell. For Anok to stand in that position was a declaration. Fashion was no longer the story of a select few. It was widening, shifting, changing. From Prada, Anok's career exploded exponentially. She became a familiar face for the biggest houses: Versace, Balmain, Mugler, Valentino, Tom Ford, Givenchy. Beyond the catwalk, she graced the covers of fashion's most powerful magazines: Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, ID, Dazed. In every editorial, she transformed like fashion's true chameleon, fierce and commanding one moment, fragile and soulful the next. This ability to shift and embody extremes made her one of the most sought-after muses of her generation. But what sets Anok apart isn't just the glamorous shows or the glossy photos. What makes her powerful is the way she connects with a new generation. Anok doesn't only exist on the runway, she lives in the stories, in the voices of an entire community. In a world dominated by social media, young audiences don't only want spectacle, they want truth. And Anak delivers both. On the runways of Paris, Milan, and New York, she embodies luxury and power. But online, in interviews and personal reflections, she is candid and approachable, unafraid to speak of loneliness, prejudice, or her desire to change the industry. That's why Anak has become not just a high-fashion supermodel, but a pop culture icon. Young people see her as a mirror, a black woman, a female trailblazer, a Gen Z voice, all in one. And it's this intersection that has allowed her influence to stretch far beyond fashion itself. The brands understand this well. They choose Anak not just because she is visually striking, but because she carries meaning. When Prada had her open the show, it was a declaration of diversity. When Versace placed her as the vedette, it was a recognition of Gen Z's new power. When Vogue put her on its cover, it wasn't just about selling magazines, it was about shaping the aesthetic of an era. At her peak, Anak began being compared to legends like Naomi Campbell and Iman. Yet what's remarkable is that instead of being overshadowed, she carved a new path. If Naomi embodied the boldness and dominance of the 90s, Anak represents something different: authenticity and strength born from vulnerability, the very essence of Gen Z. It is here that Anak's legacy begins to take shape. She is not just a face in campaigns. She is a reminder that fashion can no longer ignore diversity, nor the voice of the new generation. She proves that a model does not have to hide who they are to succeed. In fact, it is truth that makes them immortal. Think of it. Before the age of 25, Anak has already achieved what many models never touch in an entire lifetime. From a girl discovered by chance through a candid photo on Instagram, she has become one of the most in-demand figures on the planet. But more than that, she planted a seed of change. And one day, when the history of the 21st century fashion is written, perhaps there will be a line that says, Anok Yai, the woman who turned difference into legacy and the runway into the voice of a generation. Her journey stands as proof of a beautiful paradox. Fragility can become strength, and difference can become legacy. Anok Yai is not a supermodel in the old sense: tall, cold, silent, untouchable. Instead, she embodies a new standard: powerful yet approachable, luxurious yet authentic, high fashion yet deeply human. From a South Sudanese girl growing up in America, once doubted and scrutinized, Anak stepped onto the runways of Prada, Versace, Balmain, and Mugler, not just as a model, but as a symbol. Every stride she takes is more than a catwalk. It is a declaration of diversity, of the power of identity, of a generation unafraid to live unapologetically as themselves. The generations before believed that to succeed, you had to play a role, the role of the distant supermodel, the flawless figure with no cracks. But the Gen Z that Anok represents chose the opposite path. They believe success is born from honesty, from turning scars into light. And that is why Anok has become the voice of an entire generation, a generation that no longer believes in fake perfection, but in uncompromising authenticity. The most striking part is that Anok doesn't have to shout to be heard. She lets her presence speak. She lets her gaze, her aura, her stride say the words for her. I am here, and I deserve to be seen. That silence, paradoxically, resonates louder than any speech. Today, when people speak of Anok Yai, they are no longer talking about a black model. They are talking about a global icon, a face that stands not only for fashion, but for change, for courage, and for the belief that beauty has many forms. And if there's one message Anok leaves behind, it is this. You don't need to look like anyone else to become an icon. You just need the courage to be yourself. When the runway lights fade and the music stops, people may forget the collection, they may forget the designer, but what they will remember is the image of Anok Yai, proud, powerful, and profoundly authentic, walking as if the world could no longer turn away. And that is why Anok Yai will not just be another name in fashion. She will be part of cultural legacy itself, living proof that a new generation can redefine the definitions of beauty, of success, and of what it truly means to be a supermodel.